In this week's Parsha, Parshat Behar, we can summarize the entire Parsha with one simple sentence. This statement appears by Rabbi Elazar in Avot chapter 3, Mishnah 8. It reads, Ten lo mishalo, give to God from his own. She'ata v'shalcha shalo, because you and him are both God's. Let me explain. When we send our kids to sleepaway camp, or even send them to school, we'll always be very, very careful that none of their clothes should get mixed up with anyone else's. No, we'll sit painstakingly with each sock, with each shirt, with each sweater, writing their initials or their name, because we want to make sure that those people around our kids know whose clothes those are. Well, truth be told, each and every one of us have an invisible label on us. And each and every one of our possessions also has an invisible label. It reads, property of God. We're Hashem's. Everything's Hashem's. The entire world is Hashem's. When I'm given a possession, I'm essentially given the right, given the responsibility to do something good with it. To do something meaningful with that. I'm given a piece of land in Israel. As part of one of the tribes, I am expected to work that land to make something happen. I'm given wealth. I'm expected by God to share that with others, to make sure that those people who aren't given the wealth also have an opportunity to meet their essential needs. The entire theme of the Parsha of Behar is give to him from his own, because you and your possessions are his. In other words, Behar is property of God. Let's take a look at a quick summary and overview of the major topics in Parshat Behar, and we're going to see that this property of God theme is throughout the entire Parsha. We have a quick overview, and then we'll go a little bit deeper. Of the topics that appear in this week's Parsha, we have Shemitah, the sabbatical year, we have the Jubilee year, the Yovel year, which is after 7 cycles of Shemitah, the 50th year. We have then a whole number of halachot and different laws that deal with someone who is poor. Ki yamuch achicha, when your brother becomes destitute, has no means to support himself, what happens? And then, most importantly, how do you react? Let's take a look a little bit deeper at each of these parts of the parasha. The mitzvah of Shemitah is, for 6 years, we work the land, we make things grow. The 7th year, we let the land lie fallow. We're not pruning, we're not growing, we're not encouraging growth. What's the reason? What is all leading up to? The Parsha says, the Torah says, in Kaf Hey Vav 25:6, Hayta Shabbat haaretz lachem leochla, and essentially this Shemitah year should be for you to be able to eat all the produce of the land. So for who? You have your own field. Who gets to come in? Who gets the entry ticket to your orchard? Lecha, of course you. Ula avdecha, and to your servant. Ula amatecha, and to your maidservant. Not only that, ula sichircha, and the people you're hiring. Ula toshavacha, hagarim imach, and all the people who are living on the land with you. In other words, and this is a practical halacha, the entire land is what's called in Hebrew hefker, ownerless. That means I'm walking along the street. I see a juicy pomegranate that's growing on your tree. I can eat it. You see a beautiful fig that's growing outside my front door. You can come right in and help yourself to as much as you'd like. The major message here, the land isn't really yours. It's really God's to decide who gets what. Property of God. to the extent that the Ramban Nachmanides actually says that the fruit that grow during the Shemitah year are actually holy. They have kedusha, and there's even a mitzvah to eat that fruit. You're imbibing holiness. You're eating God's property during the Shemitah year. It's an amazing idea. And indeed, this coming year in Israel is actually going to be the Shemitah year. So for those who will be there, will have a special opportunity to eat the produce of Israel. The second topic is Yovel, the Jubilee year. It's a very interesting mitzvah. After 7 cycles of Shemitah, 7 cycles of 7 years, 7 times 7 is 49. The 50th year is the Jubilee year, Yovel. What happens in Yovel? A couple of major things happen. Slaves, any servants, are all freed. The bodies go free. Not only that, but also land, the highest level, the highest symbol of personal property, one's homestead, they are returned to their original ancestral owners. Each tribe of Israel was given their own tract of land, and each family in each tribe was given their specific homestead. Those lands all go back to their original owners every 50 years. You buy a house, it's a beautiful house. You have beautiful fields around you, beautiful orchards. Put a lot into it. At a maximum of 50 years, you're going to move. You're going to move out. You're going to give that land back to the original owners. That's such a present and serious reminder of how the land really isn't our personal property, it's the property of God. So too, with the wealth that we're given, with the resources that we're given, we're also reminded that it's property of God. How so? Well, if it's my own toy, if it's my own resources, I would be able to do whatever I want with it. So, you can take an example of a kid. Take a 5-year-old. He has a special toy that he's very connected to. You'll expect that he can decide, well, if his brother's going to play with it, when his sister gets to play with it, if he's playing with it now, he's in control. God says, you're not really in control. It's mine. This is what you got to do. Now let's take a look at some of the examples that the Torah gives. When kiyamuch achicha, when your brother is destitute, he's down, he's in the dumps, gotta look out for him. Now, the first thing that might happen is, the kid, the person, the cousin, the relative, the brother will sell his land. He's going to sell some of his holdings. He's going to liquidate his assets. In that case, he can. It's his right. He can sell it. However, you have a mitzvah as someone who's related to him to help him redeem it. Use your wealth, not to buy it off him for yourself. Use your wealth to pay off the creditor, to pay the person who bought it from your brother, so that the title, the deed to that land can go back to its original owner. Your brother, not you. You don't even enjoy a cent of that. But it's a mitzvah to use your wealth to help get your brother back on his feet, to get his homestead back. Now, we don't want to talk about possessions in terms of land holdings, but the end of the Parsha also deals with servants. If someone is destitute, one is able to sell himself as an indentured servant. Now, of course, when we think of servants or think of slaves, some of the images that might come to mind are possibly blacks in the South of America, in the South of the United States of America, and the horrors that they had to undergo. But the Jewish servant is very, very different, whether Jewish or not Jewish. And even if one has to sell themselves out of necessity, he does not sell his dignity. And the Talmud even tells us that if you have one pillow for between you and your servant gets the pillow. The law is also, if you have a non-Jewish servant, you physically abuse him. There are 24 different tips of limbs that if you cut that off, if you physically abuse him in 24 different ways, the man goes free. Can't do it. Even if they're a servant, they still have their dignity. That dignity, that Tselem Elokim, is something that can't be taken away, because it's not yours to take away. That's really Hashem's, because ultimately, we're all really property of Hashem. That Tselem Elokim is something that comes from above. The main message of this week's Parsha, property of God, also is reflected in a similar Mishnah later on in Tractate Avot, in chapter 4, Mishnah 11, by Rabbi Yonatan. Rabbi Yonatan says, Kol ha'mekayem et haTorah me'oni, anyone who fulfills the Torah through poverty, safo l'kaima me'osher, will ultimately fulfill it in wealth. V'chol ha'mevatel et haTorah me'osher, and anyone who fails to fulfill the Torah with wealth, when he has the resources from Hashem, safo levatla me'oni, will ultimately not keep the mitzvot when he doesn't have his wealth, when he has poverty. What's the idea here? God is the world's largest investor. When he gives us a parnasah, when he gives us money, he gives us resources, he gives us abilities, he is investing in us. He believes in us that we can do something with that. Therefore, if someone is already given a small investment, small resources, and he's already keeping the Torah, he's already keeping the mitzvot, how much more so if God invests wealth in this person? And so to the opposite, God will pull out of bad investments. If God gives a certain resource to someone, gives a wealth to someone, he doesn't keep the Torah, wasting my resources on him, I'm going to give it to someone else, and he pulls out. The idea behind that, the reasoning behind that, is the same that we saw by Rabbi Elazar. That it's God's property. That when we're given resources, we're given abilities, those are God-given. We have to realize that they're from God. And if it's from God, it's for a reason. And that reason is reflected in this week's Parsha. Through all the mitzvot of how we treat people who are kiyamuch achicha when they're impoverished, to how we deal with the land and our own personal connection with the land, whether that's ownership of the land, or whether that's what we do with the land, working the land or not working the land on Shemitah. What the Torah is trying to do is ingrain in us the message that the property of God. And once we're able to internalize that message, that everything that we have is from God, it actually gives us a tremendous amount of bitachon. It actually gives us a tremendous amount of trust and faith in God. Because when we see how God has given us resources, God has given us abilities, God has given us wealth, as a result of my mitzvot and as a result of the way I've been serving Him, that gives me strength to continue. It gives us strength to serve God and reinvest all the resources that we receive. This is a tremendously important point to instill in our kids, that we were blessed. We are blessed to live in a Western country. We're blessed to live in an age that we have so many resources and so many blessings. We have to appreciate those blessings. But the reason that we're given those blessings is to then reinvest our resources in Torah, in mitzvot, and in chesed. If this week we can instill that message in our kids through looking at the Parsha, through discussing it with them, through looking at these two Mishnayot, I think that we can successfully prepare them to have a stronger faith and trust and dedication, commitment to Hashem and Torah and mitzvot. Shabbat Shalom.